Welcome back to the MCC podcast. I'm Alex Carruthers. This is Steve Sheppard over from Combined Intelligence in the UK. A brief recap on last episode. We've teamed up to try and help deliver a super consultancy offering in the machine learning space, taking both a collective of over 80 different specialist businesses all around the world, but channeled through Steve's expert consultancy guidance. This means that Steve's going to be able to connect your company and your company's AI initiatives to your company vision.
Thank you, Alex. Great introduction. As Alex says, our objective is to help organisations, predominantly in the UK, but also sort of internationally, with the application of AI, very much in the context of the business sense and how the organisation can make real value from what is a leading edge technology that is continuing to evolve. We're excited, obviously, to partner with MC and the wider collective of AI specialist organisations to be able to bring that broad capability to the UK marketplace.
This week, we're talking about hype, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot of hype in the market. Too often, we're hearing about client stories where it's just not quite working out. We've all heard about the notorious AI winters. 3 times there has been an AI winter. 3 times, almost a decade in between each, since the 70s. I mean, Steve, you've been working in the game for a small while. You still look great, by the way. You've been around the block. Tell me, what's been your experience of this?
Yeah, it's okay. You can call me old. So I did a PhD in AI in the 90s. And at the time, I think we were certainly in one of the sort of the downturn times of I was looking at AI for medical diagnosis of medical images, which, if you look now, is now becoming a reality. So if you take that best part of 30 years, 25 years at least, it's taken from going from sort of the sort of thing I was looking at from a research perspective to now actually form part of medical equipment, medical diagnosis, where AI is there to help augment a diagnosis performed by a doctor. But what's changed over that time has been quite considerable. I remember going into university and sort of trying to use as much of their computing resource as I possibly could so that I could train machine learning models to process fairly high resolution images that I then had to get down to very low set of features so that I could actually effectively train them over a weekend or over a few days in some cases, what would now be considered to be very small neural network models. So that computational power, and I was at a leading edge university, and they had good resources at the time, but compared with now, we're light years further ahead. And ultimately, that is one of the key enablers for AI now, but wasn't available 25 years.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying the maths, the algorithmic ability to categorize a medical scan positively or negatively, that existed in the 90s. That existed. But what you lacked was the computational ability to process that amount of data. Is that right?
We've moved on in terms of AI algorithms. We have deep learning, we have convolution neural networks, and so on. But actually, it's not radically, in my view, different to the basics that we were doing in the 90s. We had neural networks with backpropagation. We still have neural networks with backpropagation. We have a whole host of other variations as well. But ultimately, I think the biggest limitation at the time was that computational resource, and arguably to some extent availability of data. I was going around to the hospitals and getting image scans on 5.25-inch floppy disks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're not old, Steve. Old,
but
you're not old.
But
Don't worry.
It was old kit, so old medical equipment. So they did have the smaller floppy disks at that time, the 3.5-inch or whatever.
It's not a measurement contest. It's fine.
No, indeed, but it sort of the things that have changed, that access to data, the computational power, and yes, some level of evolution of AI algorithms and models and processes and so on has sort of combined together to sort of get where we are now.
So we're obviously talking about health, and yet I think whilst we do both together, we both cater to the health and pharmaceutical companies out there. I think it's probably fair to say that at least we have a focus on manufacturing, on primary industries, on business intelligence, on commerce in general. So obviously we're talking about healthcare and scanning as an example as to why AI is kind of now ready and available and good to use now. So let's just transfer that example into perhaps a commercial context. So it's about the availability of data. It's about the computational ability to process that data. So what is it that's changed in a commercial context? Is it just these things? Why is now, like if we're talking to a manager, what is it that makes now the right time to invest in AI?
That's an interesting question. Ultimately, when I was doing AI, it was an academic topic. It was something that researchers did at universities, and there's a bit of hype occasionally coming up about robotics, for example, or talking heads, that sort of thing. But it wasn't at the world of practical commercial applications in most cases. Now we've moved on, and AI is being used quite considerably by the very large organizations, whether it's the Googles, the Amazons, the eBays. They are now embedding AI in what they do, whether that's around customer understanding, whether that's around customer journeys, whether that's around logistics, a whole host of different applications. And you're seeing that in the very large organizations. The interesting thing now is that that's propagated sort of down towards the sort of the mid-size and the medium-size organizations, both in the context of AI embedded within business applications. So whether you're using an AI capability within a CRM system, within a finance system, and so on. So it's being embedded in business applications to a greater or lesser extent. Some people say it's AI. It might be rules, it might be whatever. It might fit in the wider umbrella, not necessarily machine learning, for example. But I think that acceptance now that data has a lot of value in it. We understand that now from an advertising and a promotion, and we can get on to the privacy concerns as well around some of that. But the fact that
Future episode.
organizations, future episode, future, a lot of organizations know a lot about us, and their objective is to use that information to promote things that we might want to buy from them. And there are drivers around that and the value around that, but that acceptance that their organizations have over the years now gathered a lot of information. That might be about people, it might be about products, it might be about telecoms networks, it might be about manufacturing plant, and that data has insight, it has value. We might be able to use it to predict the future. That might be predicting equipment failures, it might be detecting security issues. There's a whole host of opportunities out there that I think are being discovered based on this understanding of actually we've gathered all this data and now we can actually use it and gain some value. And AI is a way of doing that if you combine it with the computational power that we've got and some of the tools. The tools have evolved. You can do auto ML with some of the big platforms. You can go to specialist partners within our network who have invested time and effort on a particular application of AI and have learned how to extract information and features and value from that information and turn that into something that businesses and organizations can actually use. So, it's that, I think, recognition of that there is now value in this, and it's not just a scientific research type sort of technology that I think is now where we're moving to. And that's why, I think we think that organizations need to make sure they've got that in their strategy and in their vision. They can't just leave it to others. It needs to be embedded in part of what they do as an organization.
And I suppose why now? Well, do you want to be before your competition or after? I think that's what it comes down to. It's about competitive edge. And I think this is the challenge for consultancies. And Steve, something you said about some specialists becoming very good at delivering AI that may or may not be as old as the 90s, as young as the 90s, it's about the ability to make that work for the industry and for the company specifically. It's You can't just throw off the shelf AI at a problem and think it's going to deliver the insight and the competitive edge that the hype is potentially convincing you, or is trying to convince you that it's capable of. The reality is that you need specialist consultants who have experience delivering those AI algorithms in that industry. I remember one of my favorite ones was one of my favorite examples of AI gone wrong or just failing to understand the industry was actually in the agricultural sector. It was proven beyond shadow of a doubt that if you could just fly drones over fields and measure the differences in the greens and the color variations of the crops and so on and so on, you would be able to easily better predict crop yield, guide water management better, and as a result, deliver greater return, such as if you're a dairy farm. The more grass that you can get, the more milk that you can get. The problem was that it was different every season. Every single season, there's subtle variations in light, in cloud covering, in rain, in the angle of the photography of where that drone was on that day and what the shadows were doing. And there was just too much to correct for. And so instead of only needing one season's worth of training data, as it transpired, this company actually, it worked eventually, but they needed years of data. And I think this is where the specialist consultancy comes in. They've got these years of experience that they've been bashing their heads against the wall on test case clients, and I hate to label it that, but it's kind of true. And the test case clients have come before, they're in the past. So, from the way that I see it, now is the time to invest in AI because it's not only been proven from a mathematical perspective in terms of the technological capability of these systems, but they've now been tweaked a bit. They've now been cultivated to be more accurate and effective at the industry level, at the company level. So yeah, I guess that's my perspective. Any final thoughts on why now, on believing the hype, on, I mean, are we talking this up too much? What should we be telling our prospective clients here, Steve?
In the end, yeah, the industry is subject to being influenced a bit too much by hype at times. And there is always the risk. And arguably, we're sort of in that world with autonomous vehicles. There's been the promise that we'll have autonomous vehicles for a while now. And actually, we've sort of reached a point where we're not making quite the rapid progress that perhaps people thought. People have recognized the challenges around safety and the sort of the variability that actually happens in the real world when it comes to driving conditions. And are we going to have autonomous vehicles that we could just sort of get in and it will just take us to our destination? Is that going to happen imminently? Perhaps not as imminently as people thought a few years ago. And the risk is sometimes is that hype has an opposite reaction where you go the opposite direction and you go, well, it's AI, it doesn't live up to the reality. We're not going to do that. We're not going to get any value out of it. Because they hear sort of some bigger sort of negative stories around it. But it's like any technology, and there are other technologies like RPA and so on that are going through the similar sort of hype cycles. There is a mid path that you can take. There is that there's the opportunity to innovate, but you want to build it on some concrete capability, as you were talking about, Alex, with regards to most organizations. It's probably unrealistic to try and being on the leading edge. But what you can do is you can take the basis of the technology with the specialisms that are there and the capabilities that are around, and tailor that to your particular business and your particular business opportunities, so that you can actually add some innovation and some differentiation on what your product offerings are or your processes that you use to generate your products, and you can get real value out of it. But it's not all about just starting complete from scratch, because I think we both believe that is possible for a small select set of businesses. But for many, the quickest route and the safest route is to build on something that exists, make something unique on the top of that for yourself and for your own business.
And that's exactly why the Machine Commons has clustered our suppliers according to their successfully delivered use cases. And that's how we'll be working with Steve. Steve comes in, connects potential capabilities to company vision, picks a direction, guides you along the way, and then uses our collective as a resource to find what has already been successfully delivered. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Today we've been talking about AI hype and why the time is now, or at least you should consider it. Obviously, it's not suitable for every business to begin now, but you should be considering it. You should be thinking about it. We're here to help you figure out how to deal with this new technology. If you've got any questions, if you want to make any kind of comment, if you've got things that you want to know about in AI, get in touch, engage with that content box below, talk to us. We're going to be as responsive as we possibly can. But other than that, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Contact information is on the screen right now. Don't hesitate to get in touch.